Good morning, everybody. Nick, Peter, nice to have you with us this morning. It's a public holiday today,
Reconciliation Day.
Reconciliation Day. So I'm sure some of you are going to have some coffee in bed, maybe a lazy breakfast later, and then mow your lawn or something like that.
But before that, we can still just push this devotion to about a 3 hour, just
That's
because
right.
the guys have got time
I think
there.
let's go double today because
Yeah.
we've got the time.
Double
Yeah.
blessing.
Yeah, I'm playing golf
Are you playing golf?
Yeah.
On public holidays?
on the public holiday.
That
Can't wait.
for me is like a sin. It's a rest day. Anyway.
Reconciling the ball with the hole.
Yeah, yes,
How do you
I'm-
reconcile that?
I want to reconcile with my golf ball
Yeah.
today. I'm very cross with it at the moment.
All right. I hope you hit a good one. Okay. We're on Gideon, part 2. All right. So maybe a very, very quick recap of Gideon. Part 1 is that we saw that Gideon was a man really who didn't see much in himself. He was very insecure in a sense. When God called him, he didn't think he was going to fit the job. And the whole point there was that God sometimes, or maybe most of the time, sees stuff in us that we don't. And God chooses still to use us in spite of the fact that we may not see the gifts and the talents. And I think there are, unfortunately, a lot of believers all over the place that just in hiding not because necessarily they don't want to, but sometimes they think, I just can't. I can't do this stuff. And it's so good to know that God sees it in you and God wants to use it. That was part 1. And so part 2 is God now calls Gideon to the next step. And he gets him to remove unrighteousness and idolatry from the nation. So it seems like this nation of God-fearing people just slipped down so quickly into idolatry. And it's actually very sad, but it's very real, how they just slipped away from the truth.
I think the whole call to all of us in the New Testament is this stripping off the old, like clothing almost, and clothing ourselves with the new. Because you can't stay static. You're either being influenced by your surroundings and environment, and we're talking about media, we're talking about what we're exposed to. And while we can easily point a finger here and say, look at these guys, look how far gone they were, I wonder how far gone we are in our community today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the story of Gideon because it reminds me a lot of what our Christian walk is. I think a lot of times God calls us. He called Gideon to go and do the purposes of God. But he calls all of us. He calls us to follow him. And the first thing he asks Gideon to deal with is the idols and the idolatry. And I think that's what God calls us to do. First we deal, before he's going to use our lives and we're going to do all these amazing things, is clean our own space, clean our family space. And so I love the progression, the call, clean up your space, and then he sees the power of God.
I think one of the things that is so easy is if we had to say to you today, this is a nation that saw signs and wonders and miracles of God on a daily basis in their lives. And yet, every now and then, idols came in and stuff. And it's very quickly we say, yo, that's bad. But that happens so quickly. I think it's a gradual process, isn't it? I think if you're really on fire for God and somebody says, worship, Baal, it's an idol. It's not even a real God. An astropole or something like that is worship this pulpit. And if you're really on fire for God and I'm telling you to worship this pulpit because it'll give you life, you'll tell me I'm off the wall. But if gradually, I think sin and idolatry, we gradually move slowly away from the truth and the fire of God, and then idols creep into our lives. So it's a gradual process.
I remember the book that George Barner wrote, The Frog in the Kettle. That sense of the water heating slowly.
Yeah.
But if the frog doesn't move out of it, it's going to slowly take him out. And I think that's something we're all susceptible and vulnerable to.
So Nick, we're pointing fingers to them. What are some of the idols that we have nationally, and then let's go individually? What do you think are some of the national idols South Africans have got?
Well, I think just to get there, I think for me the benchmark is the 10 Commandments. First commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. So what we see God wants us to do is to be holy and solely in love with Him, committed to Him, passionate about Him. He is our life. So anything that replaces that is an idol. And so anything that takes up more priority, more time, more energy, more love, becomes an idol in my life, and which sounds quite harsh, but it's true. And so I think when we look at our nation, that was your question?
Yeah, the first one.
I think that the difficult thing about our nation is that, as we were talking, the ANC liberated our country. We were saying God did that. I think people worship the ANC and don't worship God. And I think that's a major idol in our nation. It's not to undermine what they've done. It's the people's hearts responding to them, which has to be checked. I think people like Nelson Mandela, a great man. But some people idolize the man as if he's God. And I think that's God used him, but he's not God. He's a man.
I think if you had to say today nationally on TV that Mandela was a sinner, people will stone you, because he's become an idol. Now the question that I have then is are we missing the mark? And when it comes to even politics, is that so quickly we look at people or a party as the redeemer rather than God. That's when the digression, the going down, that's when it starts, Pete.
I think anything, again, that takes the place of God in terms of his primary place, that primary affection. Because remember, it's easy to get into just a way of life because of the pressures around us. I mean, that whole challenge of Paul in Romans chapter 12, as he reaches the end of chapter 11, there's that amazing doxology in terms of what God's doing. And then straight away he says, therefore, in view of God's mercies, offer up your body as a living sacrifice. Remember, our lecturers at Baptist College often used to tell us the problem with a living sacrifice is it always wants to climb off the altar when the heat starts coming. And I think that says something about us even in the church.
It doesn't want to die.
Yeah, because we do. I mean, Dietrich Bonhoeffer in that whole cost of discipleship, he says, when Christ calls a man, he calls him, come, die. So it's that kind of, we as a nation like this get used to the way of doing church, the way politics work. Any party can be an idol. Any system can be an idol.
Can church become an idol? It could probably
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are in love with the church, but not in love with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so the church can be an idol.
Yeah. So church, I'm going to church. And we're not saying don't. We're saying, yes, you must serve your church. But I think sometimes our denomination, remember when we were in a specific denomination, we used to hear people say, I am, let's mention anyone, I am a charismatic, or I'm a Pentecostal, I'm a Baptist, or I'm a Presbyterian. No, I am a believer. So we have idolized denominations as well, and specific churches as well. And I think, Nick, that's why we've seen, Pete, some people falling away from the church because they've not come to Christ. They've come to the church. But let's go to personal idols. What are some of those?
Look, I want to touch on one because whenever I speak about it, I feel like I'm being harsh. But I've always been in children's ministry and youth ministry, and one of the things that's always I've struggled with is when parents say we can't come to church because of my kids, or the kids sports, the kids do and so they neglect their church life, their spiritual life because of their children. And I often think we can't make our families an idol. God is the one who protects us. God's the one who keeps us. You put him first, he'll look after your family. And I found in our society today, we're so family verskrik. I don't know what the right terminology around it is that we put our families and our spouses and our kids above God. And I know that it's touchy, but I think it's something we have to really sit back and think through and say, when push comes to shove, am I doing something because I love God, or am I doing something because I love my family and I think God will understand? And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I want to raise it as something to think about, because
I think it's extremely important here. We're not pointing fingers to anybody, but we're saying it is extreme because it is true. What I'm teaching my child is your needs to become before us serving God. And that is not real. I remember sometimes during our kids' teenage years, they said, I don't go to church. I said, no. On Sundays in this house, that's where we go. Whether you like it or not, while you live here, that's where we go. We're gonna go there. You may go with a bad attitude, but hopefully that will change during the worship.
I remember that Elizabeth also, when it comes to playing sports over on a Sunday, you're not going to be in the team. Oh, that's not fair. Well, you're not going to be in the team because Sundays we go to church. And
there was a rugby player, remember, Springbok rugby
was,
player? What was his name?
Ian McDonald did it. I know Ian McDonald did it. He refused to play on a Sunday.
Yeah, and there was one that actually played a test, and it could have been the final or the semi-final. And he missed out because they played it on the Sunday, and I can still see him. They had a picture of him sitting in a room somewhere on a little wall reading his little New Testament while the others were playing. And I'm sure that was phenomenally difficult. Those days they didn't play 20 matches for the Springboks a year. If there was one or two, and if you didn't play that, you missed it. So other idols, Pete, that keeps us away from. So church could definitely be one.
Yeah.
Your children can be one.
I think even if something is associated with the Lord, like you say, I remember in that Chariots of Fire movie while we were talking about sports people, is that Eric Liddell, that Scottish missionary, his whole running, he said when he ran, he felt like God was pleased with him, that God rejoiced. And that was the right attitude, but his commitment to his sister was that God's mission comes first. And he set that whole thing aside. I mean, we know from the movie what a respect that there was from him. So I think coming back to me, we've spoken about family. I think how we spend time. Time is a gift that God has given us. And it's good to be in touch with people. So something like digital platforms, media, this kind of opportunity. But sometimes we cross over where we get into the habit where we're reading our Bible less and less. We're spending time listening to God less and less. And it's YouTube, it's different digital platforms and trying to keep abreast with everything. And that in itself can just take so much time. And while it could be used for God, it could also come between us and God. So it's that constant asking the Holy Spirit to check us.
Here's something I want to throw out there. I think that 95% of us watching today are having an affair with our cell phones. Because you know what? You sleep more with your cell phone than with your wife. The cell phone is next to my bed. It's the last thing I do before I go to sleep, and the first thing I check to see if there's any messages. You're scrolling through Facebook and message after message after message. These things become idols in our lives, and we don't think it's harmful until we realize when that thing says you've now spent 2.5 hours on it on the day, you start, I'd rather put that thing off because I don't want people to know, that's an idol. Sport, the sport that I do, how many of us would rather cycle on a Sunday morning than come to church? What message are we sending to our families? That my physical fitness comes before my spiritual, my walk with God. It's dangerous, phenomenally dangerous.
I had a principle when I became a Christian, because I enjoyed sport. I played a lot of sport. But I had this principle I will not spend more time on sport than I spend with God. And it took sometimes I'd have to wake up an hour earlier in the morning or whatever the case may be, but it set the right platform for me, because I found that a lot of my friends who were also Christians, they would play the sport and not have their quiet time because they didn't have the time, or not come to church or whatever, or get involved, and do things for God because of their sport. And I think that is a major, in our society, it's a major problem. Watching sport, playing sport, social sport, the hobby of sport. People spend hours and hours and hours. And
birthday parties on Sundays. Let me tell you something. Birthday parties on Sundays is scores of Christians that I know. Oh, we can't come to church. We have a birthday party. Or I'm preparing a lunch on Sunday. I can't come to church. Those kind of things. Let's move on though. There's another important thing that I see about Gideon here, Pete, is that he was fairly fearful when God said to him, go and deal with the altars of Baal. He didn't go in the bright, sunny 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning or 12 o'clock in the day and say, guys, I'm Gideon, sent by God. I'm going to wipe out these altars. He went at night. What message was that giving us?
I think it's a challenge to all of us, is that when you're steeped in an environment like this, when it's your family members, because they see things as normal, and the Spirit of God starts convicting you, remember, for him to try and have to explain this to people, that this is what God was doing, that he saw an angel. I mean, imagine if it was one of our lighties. And that's the thing as well, is that the older people, God almost bypasses them and comes to a younger generation, comes to a Gideon and says, listen, this is what I want you to do. So obviously there's the godly part of respect that he has for his elders, for his community, but God calls him to pull down this central focus, this kind of way of life,
Of his people, yeah.
Of his whole people. And I mean, all of the elders in the community, you didn't just go into a community. I mean, think of the equivalent of similar things today. It could be a system. It could be, finances we spoke of just now, retail shopping. How many people over a weekend are just walking through shops thinking, I've got to have this, I've got to have that, all of the different retailers online. I mean, it's a whole way of life. And if someone stops and says, no, we're not going to do this, we're going off the grid. We think the church should be a counterculture to this. Imagine a person Jared's age, Bryce's age, coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to take this thing out.
I'm closing the internet on Sunday.
Whatever it is, we're stopping this thing. No more DSTV, not for the type of disciples we're making. Can you imagine what the society would do when they say, no, cheers, China, off you go. We're not going to tolerate that. Yeah. So it was understandable that he had to find a way to do this, but in a way that wouldn't be confronting in your face. But look what the consequence was.
But Nick, what does it say about his boldness? Because I hear what you're saying, that out of respect maybe, but there was also an issue of boldness here,
Yeah, it's difficult because, I think when we read it, like you were saying, you'd expect he would be like a Joshua, go out there, middle of the day, God's with me, I'm going to do this stuff. And the fact that he goes at night obviously indicates that he was afraid and wasn't as bold as we would have thought he should have been. But I think the thing is that firstly he did it. Yeah. He was obedient to God. And
he did it.
Yeah, he did it. The second thing is that I'm not sure. I think we might touch on it still. Is that confidence in God grows?
Yeah.
So he took that first step. God came through for him. God was preparing him for a battle with 300 men. Yeah. This was the first step. This was God starting to teach him. You know what? Because if you read the story, the consequence for what he does was they were going to kill him.
Yeah.
His dad stepped in and said, no, let Baal contend for himself. So he knew that. He knew that when they find out he's the guy who stopped this thing, who brought this altar down, this false god down, that he could lose his life for it.
It's true, I think boldness grows, I mean, I remember a guy that gave his life to the Lord when we were in our teens, early 20s maybe, and he was just so immediately so radical for God. But that doesn't happen to all of us. Sometimes that boldness to become radical for God grows on us. And I think in Gideon, it seems like it's growing in him. He goes at night, he rips down these altars. The next day, everybody is woest and woedend and wants to find out. He doesn't just come and stand there and say, it was me. It doesn't say how they found it. It says, but when they found out that Gideon had done it, they wanted to kill him. And then his father-in-law stepped in. So it seems like he was still a little bit bunged to say, hey guys, it was me. Take me out if you want. But so his father steps in and wisely said, listen, don't you speak on behalf of your God, your false God. Let him speak for himself. And let him defend himself. But then Gideon still becomes the object of ridicule. They found out, and they associated him with Baal. Let Baal plead for himself. That's the name they gave him. And so there was ridicule, yeah.
I think as well, amazing to see that when we obey God and fulfill what he's calling us to do, even as a young man, there's the sense where God works through his father and his family. It's quite something to think that the people of Israel could come to a place where when an idol to Baal is taken out, that they want to kill the person that God has instructed to do that. And in our society today, it's like touching on certain very sensitive spots as well. I mean, the whole gender debate at the moment, and this thing of how you can't be kind of like, homophobic. That's the big thing. It's like you've got to be politically correct. So you've got to say the right thing. You've got to be seen to be kowtowing to whatever the forces are. And these same spiritual forces of darkness that were at work then are at work in our sort of society today. So as we look at Gideon and we look at this need for him to trust God, we see how God puts in place his dad, a community, and there's this patience that God has, that faithful is the God who began this good work in us. He will take it on to completion.
I think also the encouraging thing is God didn't chop Gideon sideways when he was a bit fearful. He wasn't so bold. What are your closing thoughts?
My closing thought is to encourage everybody that when you respond to Christ, I think God is going to ask you to deal with the idols and the things in your life that you think you can't live without. You know, you're going to die if they're not in your life. You know, if you don't play that sport or do this thing. And I think the first thing we need to learn is when we do take that first step and do put God first over that thing, we start to realize that, you know what, God is more than that thing. And then you're in a position for God to use you even more and even more and even more. But I think, so my encouragement is deal with the idols in your life. Trust God. You know, if you feel you can't live without, trust God. And God's going to take you to other places because of that obedience.
Closing thoughts, Pete.
Yeah, for me, again, it's just how God works through the community. The same family was being influenced the wrong way. Gideon, yes, he might have gone at night, but he did it. He went there and he did it. It's the basis of all kind of guerrilla warfare, is you don't get a big fat army and go and face another person in a country on a battleground. The most effective people today are going to be the people that, you know, so there was a sense in which as he moves from the place of his limitations, God's working in his community, and God, as Nick said just now, is preparing him for that ultimate trust of God is how do you wipe out a whole army with 300 people? I mean, you get less, not more, whereas everyone says, no, let's count the size of our army, it's got to be bigger.
Yeah. I think for me as well, guys, is that an idol is anything that becomes between me and God. And you know, so often we think, well, you know, don't be legalistic. I'm going to go fishing on Sunday, or I'm going to have a party with my kids on Sunday, or I'm going to go sport on Sunday. Don't be legalistic is often the finger pointing to us when we say, no. Come to church. As people often say, but this is the only day of rest that I've got. You know what? It is so important to have our priorities sorted and correct. Anything that comes between you and God, anything that becomes more important is an idol and needs to be dealt with. And let me warn you that idol can actually grow and become bigger and bigger in your life. And the more you give space to that idol, the harder it is to destroy that idol. I'll give you an example. If you start playing sport and you're sort of making the fifth team or something like that, and you're not there on Sunday, you're not really going to be missed. But the better you get, the bigger your idol becomes. You play first team, it's too late. You know, they're going to really miss you a lot when you don't play on Sundays. Idols grow. They start small and they grow. And deal with them. Whatever is between you and God, whatever takes priority over God is an idol that needs to be destroyed. Write them down today. You've got some time today, and destroy them in Jesus' name. Have an awesome day.
Welcome, church. It's time to worship Jesus. Here we go.
There is a sound I love to hear. It's the sound of the Savior's robe as he walks into the room where people pray, where we hear praises, he hears praise. Awake my soul and sing his praise aloud. Sing Sing his praises.